tutors, mentors, and the city with your host.com.
The City Tutors presents
Tutors, mentors, and the city
with your host.com.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Kevin.com Brown, and thank you for joining me on Tutors, Mentors, and the City, brought to you by the City Tutors. And like we do every episode, please join me in welcoming our guest, Dr. Melanie Katzman. Yay!
So happy to be here. Thank you for having me, Kevin.
Yes, Dr. Katzman, Melanie, how are you? And how's things going?
Things are good. Definitely call me Melanie. We know about the doctor bit, but it's just us.
Yes, it is. It is just us, technically. So, Dr. Katzman, Melanie, when I do my interviews, I typically do no research on my guests, but I am familiar with you. We did an event together last year, and you are a distinguished scholar and author, and you came and presented for a group of students at an event we did. So I am familiar with you, but I'm still, if you would give me the grace to ask you questions from the perspective of a viewer who's unfamiliar with you, okay? So I might ask questions that I already know the answer to, but you're not giving them to me, you're giving them to the viewer, right?
Perfect.
So that being said, act like we're strangers, and let me say, Dr. Melanie Katzman, who are you?
Let's see. I am a native New Yorker who's lived in different parts of the world. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a friend, I'm a daughter, I'm a committed psychologist who wants to take the pain out of places that people suffer for no reason. So I work clinically, I work with companies, and as you mentioned, I'm an author, really dedicated to disseminating information that comes from research, comes from clinical practice, to try to help apply what we know that can make lives better, particularly with a psychological lens.
If a person is going through challenges mentally and they feel they need some help, how would a person know whether they need a psychiatrist or a psychologist?
That's actually a great question, Kevin, because oftentimes people don't know the difference between a psychiatrist, a psychologist, or a psychotherapist. A psychiatrist prescribes medicine. They have an MD. A psychologist has a PhD and is trained in advanced modalities of psychotherapy, as well as the ability to make a referral for medication if needed. A psychotherapist is a tricky title. Some psychotherapists are social workers, very well trained. Some people call themselves psychotherapists and have no training. So it's really important for the consumer, if you will, to find out about the background of the person that they're going to work with. And it's often a good entry point to meet with a psychologist or a social worker to determine whether or not medication is needed, and then you can go to a psychiatrist. Some people go to a psychiatrist first, but it's often, I think, better to see what you can do from a psychotherapeutic intervention first, and then we can add the medication, which might propel you just a little bit faster if necessary.
Absolutely. So wait a minute now. So, I'm a professional stand-up comic. So comics, we never know what's going to catch our thoughts, right?
Yeah.
You said you could be a psycho something and have no training?
Yep. And if you can use comedy to educate people about that, please do. I mean, it used to be that I would go and get my nails done, and it would be a manicurist. Now I have a beauty therapist. I go to a spa and everybody is some kind of therapist. And it's kind of a brand bleed where, you can be called a therapist for any one of a million reasons, but that's not regulated, it's not licensed, and it doesn't reflect any particular training. So be an educated consumer and really find out who it is that you're opening up your soul to.
Wow. Okay. You just told me something. I find first of all, I find that hilarious.
I kind of find it hilarious, except when I don't, right? Like, it's hilarious, and then it's like really concerning. Yeah. I mean, the same way, I'll give you some more, Kevin. So I'm also a coach. So I'm a corporate coach and advisor to companies, which is some of the ways in which we've intersected through City Tutors, because I help people at all different levels of their career move forward with greater, what I'd like to say, impact and joy. And many people call themselves a coach. Now, some of them are sports coaches, okay. Some of them are coaches that have been trained in, again, psychological and business techniques. And some people unfortunately are a little bit lost and trying to figure out what they can do. And one of the things they come up with is I'll be a life coach. And I'm like, okay, well, what are the qualifications for that? So again, I somehow have wandered into two fields that have very limited regulation. And so I always encourage people, as you're engaging with somebody, find out who they are and what qualifies them. There are great people who may not have a formal degree who can really help you. Awesome, but just know what you're getting.
Absolutely. Okay, that is so intriguing, but we won't talk about the ones you don't need credentials for, since you have the credentials.
Okay.
So let's back up. Let's back up into your early Melanie.
Okay.
You said you're from New York.
I am.
Public school or private school?
Public school until I went to college. And then my university was, so I grew up actually, and my kids, if they were listening, would go, Mom, you're from Long Island. You live in New York City now. So I got to come clean. I grew up on Long Island and I went to public school. And then I went to the University of Pennsylvania, which is in fact a private school. And then I got my PhD at Arizona State University, which is a public school, and I went there on an NIMH grant. And ASU is now the largest provider of free and online education for people who are interested in getting next level degrees. So I've been a mix of public and private.
Were you identified as brilliant from back in the days as a young Melanie running around Long Island?
I think I was identified as a status quo challenger, and I was smart enough to get out of trouble. So I was a problem because I didn't really obey authority, but I was a good student, so it was hard to punish me. And I was fortunate enough to have parents who thought it was kind of funny. But at a certain point, my dad said to me, I had gotten 100 in science for the grade, but I got a U for unsatisfactory behavior. And my dad said to me, you know, you had the gift of being able to understand the material. And so some of that wasn't in your control, but your behavior was in your control. And you've got to control yourself more.
Did you have siblings growing up?
I had an older sister. She was 9 years older than me.
Okay.
So she was a real model of what women could do. So I'm 65. My sister was 9 years older. So she was really forging a path for women at a time. Like when we were in school, women couldn't even wear pants to school. And my sister was the first class of women at Yale. She really kind of threw her body against the glass ceiling. So in a lot of ways, she modeled for me what could be done.
Absolutely. Okay. What did you do for fun growing up?
I always loved the outdoors. So I went to a camp called Wilmette, which is pretty famous because Howard Stern went there and he was a kitchen boy there. I was a waitress, but that's just beside the point. The camp was oriented towards helping people be comfortable in the outdoors. And you could go there on a sliding scale, depending on what you could afford. And so it was a great melting pot of people. I went there from the time I was really young. And every year you went, they took away a certain luxury. So like the first year you have walls and a bathroom and a shower. And then the next year the shower's outside. Then the next year the bathroom's outside. Then the next year one wall is missing. And then you're in a tent. And then you're cooking your food and sleeping in a tent. And that really prepared me for a great deal of comfort in nature. And so whenever I can, I'm outside, I'm hiking. I like extreme sports because they kind of clear my mind. So if I'm not at my desk or with clients or on a stage or in front of a camera, then you'll probably find me outside running or hiking or something else.
Okay, so let's talk about the transition points. Let's talk about the transition points from high school to college,
Okay.
undergrad to advanced degree. What were those moments like for you as far as decision making, guiding your choices, and all that kind of stuff?
So it's really interesting to be talking to someone from City Tutors because mentoring is so important and people recognizing you. So when if I dial back just to drop, when I was in going into junior high school, so it was like it was entering 7th grade, which is a different cutoff point than we have now. But when I was growing up, 6th to 7th was a big deal. And they had in my school a test program called peer counseling. So when you were in seventh grade, your eighth graders were helping you adapt. And I loved it. I loved everything those eighth graders did. And then I was so happy when I was an eighth grader, I got chosen to be a mentor for seventh graders. And I got really close with the guidance counselor who was trying to catalyze this as an idea in other schools to show how kids really benefit from just having that bridge. And so I started going to different schools with the guidance counselor, talking about the importance of having a reference group that supports you, a place to develop a new identity. And so by the time I was in ninth grade, I had already had all this exposure to psychology, to group development, and actually even to speaking. So that when I got into high school, I really was pushing for more exposure to psychological training, and my high school let me take classes at the community college in psychology and in social work. So I kind of knew when I was going into college that I wanted to be a psychologist. I felt really clear about that. I mean, later on in life, I said, whoa, did I ever stop to think that maybe there was another application of my skills? But I was at the time pretty headstrong about that being my path. So I applied to schools that had a psychology program, and day one, even before classes started, went into the psych department and said, okay, who wants to take me on as a mentee? I was pretty aggressive. So
You know, how lucky you were, how fortunate you are that you chose it. You know how many people have degrees in a certain, of course, in a certain field, and they cannot find a job in that field, and they're doing something totally outside that.
It's really true. And I also would say that I have two minors. One is in biology and one's in art history. And I've combined those also to some of the ways that I teach and understand psychology. And if I look at my career over the course of time, I've applied psychology in different ways. My training is as a clinician, but actually my job these days is much more as a corporate consultant. So I completely agree. I am grateful every day that I don't wake up and go, does my job have meaning? Like, I really feel like, I am so lucky. I also do want to emphasize that sometimes you have to flex your skill set. So my early work when as an undergraduate, and I was like, hey, somebody come take me on as a mentor. I ended up working in a rat lab, and I spent 2 years getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, if not earlier, to count rat feces, to measure the stress of rats that were put in helpless conditions. So it's super not sexy. And I make the joke that now I work with corporate executives who many people say are rats of themselves. That's not fair, but they say that. But I spent a lot of time in a rat lab. And then you can go, well, how did being in a rat lab apply to what you do now? So I think there's a certain amount, and I could go into that if it's interesting, but I think there is a certain amount of encouragement I'd want to give to people to think laterally about your degree, that you don't always have to have the exact degree for the job, and to think about how you can apply what you do know to something that may seem less obvious. So yes, look, also you have to be a little imaginative, right?
Okay. A beautiful life, you're living your best life. Did you run into any obstacles of note? What were your biggest obstacles in your academic journey?
People didn't believe in the things I wanted to study. I mean, so I told you I was in this rat lab, and I was studying what's called learned helplessness. And it during the time I was there, it became a very popular concept. So the good news was the lab kept getting bigger and bigger, but it's very hierarchical. And I wanted to leave my mark in some way. And I was making rats drunk. And I thought, gee, what happened if I made rats fat? And nobody's really looking at, this is 1970s, okay? So I was like, nobody's really looking at obesity as a stress disorder. And so I started to look at rats and obesity. And then I pushed myself into studies with another professor who specialized in obesity. And at that time, I started reading about something called night eating syndrome. And night eating syndrome fascinated me. It was people who'd wake up almost like in a comatose state, a trance state, and binge eat. And from that, I started to read and learn about people who were binging and purging. And no one had even a word that is now very familiar called bulimia. So I applied to graduate school and said, I want to study this phenomenon. And I was lucky that I got support for that. But people thought that was really weird. They said, oh, no, that's not really a problem. Well, of course, it was really a problem. And I was a pioneer in defining bulimia as an eating disorder, and as something that's real and not a vanity illness. And then I was interested in female psychology because most people who are affected by bulimia are women. And so I was interested in looking at other instances of women without power. So I said, I want to study battered women who kill their husbands. And again, my professors were like, it's another Melanie thing. And then I said, I want to study bias in transgender literature because people are identifying that men who want to become women are less competent psychologically than women who want to become men. And they're like, nobody wants to change their gender. And again, this is the 1980s at this point. So some of my major obstacles when I was in the early stages of my career is that just people thought this is ridiculous. And I kind of kept pushing. And in that same vein, then when I started to see systems of oppression and systems of opportunity, I wanted to get involved in corporate world. And now we're in the 90s and people are like, oh, please, psychologists in business, like no one's going to want to tell you about like their toileting history. And I'm like, no, this is not about like a Freudian analysis of your family history. This is about how do you work better as people. So I would say my whole career, I've had to like push, like, yeah, now leading the best life. But I would say it wasn't like everyone said, oh, Melanie, you're so smart. Come in and talk to us. Like, it wasn't exactly like that.
A lot of students running into conflicts like that in their journey currently,
Yep.
right? What strategy, what skill set should a student present when they run into a concept, an idea for their field of study, their dissertation, their thesis, and they're meeting resistance? What should they do?
So I think one of the things is having people that believe in you. And so I was and trying as hard as you can to find someone who at least believes enough in you that they will run some interference. So I had a mentor who is still one of my closest friends. Her name is Charlene Walchik, and she's a professor at Arizona State. And she started her job as professor at the same time I started as a grad student. And she really believed in me. Even though there were times where she'd be like, okay, you're a little off the wall. Like I want to present my results about bulimia on the vomit bags from airlines. I'm like, I just want to make it real. And she's like, okay, that's probably not going to work. But she really believed in me. And so she ran interference. So one thing I would say is find someone who at least is willing to listen. And then also be willing to listen when you get feedback around where you need to round your sharp edges. So there were definitely things that I was doing to try to bring attention to my interests that weren't working. And I tried to use color and drama. That goes back to like the art history person in me. I like to create things. I want to bring people in. And she was like, you know what? No, like let's stay in black and white. Like, so you have to like find someone who helps you and then be willing to listen. And I think the third thing I'd say is to speak their language, that I needed to show data, right? I had a belief about what things could be, and it wasn't full data, but at least I could talk numbers to people who needed to hear things in a more numeric way.
Absolutely. Have you ever seen the TV show Billions?
Of course.
Wendy Rhodes.
Yes.
Is that you?
I keep my clothes on. I have better boundaries. And a lot of people didn't know what I did until Billions. And then I had clients who would call me and go, Wendy, we got to talk. So I would say the closest approximation to what I do is Wendy, but I do it for multiple companies and clients.
Well, Wendy's brilliant, and she kept her clothes on in the office, and she was very efficient and very intentional as far as these high level, brilliant minds and an aggressive rat race and whatever. And she centered them in a way that as a spectator, right? Totally unfamiliar with the thing, but a big fan of the show. I watched every episode.
I couldn't wait for it to drop every Sunday. I mean, I'm totally a fan, right?
So, but I'm saying, do those high level people really need that? Is that?
Oh my God! Oh my God! like this week, I would say 5 of the CEOs that I met with were like, is everybody else anxious? I'm like, yes, if you weren't anxious, you wouldn't be in touch with reality. So I do believe that, excuse me, there are people who are in high levels of power doesn't mean they're not human, right? So the stress of having to manage what's happening in the office, all of the things that are happening in the outside world. So, right, so you have a certain amount of social unrest that bleeds into the office, and you're expected to have a point of view or justify your point of view. So there's a pressure from outside in. Internally, people see someone in power, and there's a natural inclination to question them, to push them, and then you still have a home life. Right. And so I find that for many of the people I work with at the very senior levels, they're pretty lonely. And you hear that it's lonely at the top. It is lonely at the top. Right. And so for them to have a safe space where they can, talk to me and think about what matters to them and to express their anxiety, it's really important.
Absolutely. Let's unpack the loneliness for a minute.
Sure.
I'm finishing a master's degree now. I
Oh,
went back. It's called Study of the Americas, but my focus is Africana Studies, Black Studies, right?
Okay.
I returned to school after 30 years, got my bachelor's in Black Studies, and I chose this major, Study of the Americas, because it allows me to structure a Black Studies master's degree, basically. But I noticed in my return to school, my alma mater, a CUNY school here in New York.
Yeah, great school. Yeah.
A lot of students are lonely, right?
Yes.
A lot of the
loneliness, period. Right?
Yeah. Let's unpack that. What's happening? What is that about?
Well, so I feel like I should run and get the book that's right behind me.
Take your time if you need to do whatever.
Wait, let me just run again, right? Because
I'll entertain the people. I'll juggle for a second.
Okay. So the reason I wrote this, Connect First, is because I felt that people were isolated for reasons that they didn't need to be. And it creates so much stress and strain. And that we've lost the art of connecting, and people think it's a much bigger deal. So while it's true that I would say it's lonely at the top, you're 100% right, Kevin, to say we all can feel isolated for reasons that can be avoided. And part of it, I think, is that technology has given us a false sense of connection. So people have likes and they have followers, but those aren't necessarily deep relationships and friends. Or somebody puts an emoji at the end of they say something that's pretty, conflictual, and then they put a little happy face. It's like, no happy face. You've got to dig in and do the work. And so what has happened, I think, is people move quickly. They use technology, they use symbols, and they don't have conversations. And as a result, I think there's a tremendous loneliness. I think there's also a hiding behind writing and technology, which means that we're not vulnerable with each other. And so people don't pick up the phone and have a conversation, right? And just hearing someone's voice or looking in their eyes, it's different. It's different doing a podcast on Zoom and I can see you than it is if we were just doing it, just in an auditory way. So I think there's been a lot of factors that have contributed to that. And what I would say is things that are so simple, like literally using your senses, like looking at someone, listening to what they're saying, not reloading to your argument, but listening to what they're saying, eating with people, being present, turning your electronics off, asking the second question, like not just like good morning, but how are you? And then you tell me, then like, no, but really, what does that mean for you today? I've heard your podcast in the past. You ask people about their names. I always ask people about their names. Like, tell me what your name is. Don't be invisible. Have a history. Anyway, I could go on and on. But that's why I wrote the book. Because I really feel like connecting is so important.
Show the book again. What's the name of the book?
Okay. Connect First. And it says 52 simple ways to ignite success, meaning, and joy at work. And every one of the chapters is really short. And it just says, this is for you if, do this, don't do that. Here's some pointers. No chapters more than 6 pages. It doesn't cost anything to do any of the exercises I suggest. So this isn't about like, I don't have time and I don't have money. It's like, no, there's no excuse. That's why I wrote the book. And I wrote the book with case examples from people around the world, people who are in the cubicle, people who are in the corner office. And I wrote it as a clinician and also as a business advisor. So it's like everything that I've been learning over the years, tried to put that into a book to make it easy for people.
How do we find the book?
Everywhere. As I said, to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever books are sold. I was really excited. It hit #1 on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list, which said to me that people actually care about this, right? It's been in the window of the Barnes and Noble on Fifth Avenue for years because the pandemic showed us that we were physically distant, but psychologically desperate. People really wanted to have that human connection. So more than ever, people were craving it. And what I see now, Kevin, is that people have gotten really awkward and they don't know how to be together. Like after we finish today, I'm running to Midtown to run an offsite for a company that got separated during COVID. And now they're like, how do we get back together? How are we human together again? And it seems like it should be so easy, but it's not.
It's not. Yes, yes. So first, thank you so much for your time. I know you have a busy day ahead of you, and thank you for taking a break and joining us. So I'm not going to hold you. I'm going to try to give this. I'm gonna give an open last question.
Okay.
And you can answer it however you want and take as much time as you want. So when you know it's hard out for you, you can stop talking, we wrap it up. But thank you so much for joining us, okay?
It's been a blast. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. So we got a chance to know about your current super successful status. You're living your best life. You named the age that I would have never guessed. You look so youthful and so beautiful and incredible. And we tied it into one of my favorite shows, Billions on Showtime. we know how to find your book. We have students who view this, right?
Yeah.
An academic journey. What do they need to hear? What's the secret sauce?
Love the exploration. I think that there's something about the slowing down and doing the deep thinking that is so beautiful and so energizing, and I think people miss it. But at different points in my career, writing the book, writing my dissertation, writing articles, my favorite part is when I sit with all the books and articles around me, whether it be on hard copy or soft copy, though I do like the tactile of the hard copy. So sitting in a library and just looking at the ideas and then like kind of ingesting them and say, well, what does this mean? And then almost like breaking it apart in your head so that the molecules can float in different ways. How can I recombine this? You know, if this is true, could the opposite be true? If everyone's looking up, what happens if I look down? And to me, it is asking the beautiful question is so much fun. And the reason I think I've gotten into many alternative areas was because people were all over here. So like grab the gray zone. Like, why would you run where everybody is? Right. And so much success I've seen for myself and others is why is nobody claiming this middle space? Well, figure out how you connect the dots, give it a name, own it, and then create from there. So that would be my advice. And that requires slowing down and giving yourself some space. And if it takes you a little bit longer, you're going to speed up later. But everything doesn't have to happen tomorrow. And if you're grabbing questions in the immediate, you're probably going to miss something. So enjoy the journey, ask the beautiful question, and bring in a lot of people to help you answer it who you wouldn't think would actually have the answer. And that's also where the fun comes. Yeah.
Melanie, Dr. Katzman, thank you so much for your time. Beautiful answer, beautiful response. Thank you so much for sharing. And it was an honor. It was an honor.
The honor was mine, really. I just feel like, you make me cool by asking me questions. So I appreciate that.
No, but thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
All right. Well, good luck with the series. Let me know when you post and we'll share it out on all our channels as well.
Absolutely. All right.
All righty. Take good care, Kevin.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.